sold the idea that financial independence is all about some number on your account statement, or even worse, that you don't qualify because of where you started out. That's just not true. It's not about some well-kept secret of the wealthy. It's about finding the right information and knowing how to apply it. On the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions so you can start making real financial change today. The journey to true financial independence begins right here, and it starts with you.
Continuing our mission of helping people discover, protect, and share true financial independence, this is the Get Ready for the Future show, and we welcome you in for another edition coming to you from the 6th floor of 3 Financial Center in West Little Rock. My name is Scott Inman. Glad to have you along, whether you're watching online or you're listening on podcast or radio. And Teresa Arago is alongside today doing double duty in the GenWealth radio hour. You also are on Talking Sense very often.
Yes.
So if they're listening on radio, they're going to get a lot of Teresa this week. Yeah. That's good. That's good.
Dominating it. Just a little bit at a time. I'm sneaky like that.
You do that, and then your other job is a financial advisor in the Conway office. And that keeps you busy as well. So we're glad to have you along. We've got great questions as every week. For the next half hour, we're going to be answering your questions about money. And we've got some good ones lined up. Before we get started, I'm going to ask for you to indulge us as we get on our soapbox for just a minute. So at the top of the show here, just kind of something happening more than once, I guess, in conversation as the market kind of shrugs off the so-called tariff tantrum that happened back in April and has fully regained that. We're now positive year to date. We're at or near all-time highs in the stock market, depending on which index you're measuring. Euphoria is back, right? Times are good again. And I think that there's a feeling out there that whatever you do is going to make money. But I think I want to throw a little word of caution. I had a conversation with a 19-year-old. So we're going way into the young stage here. So just starting out, just started working, just taking on all his bills, and beginning to have some discretionary income. And he was telling me that he had used $200 to buy a stock that is associated with cryptocurrency. And it has done quite well. And so obviously that's telling him he made the right decision, at least for now. But I started talking to him, and that's the only $200 he has invested. And the thing I told him, Teresa, was, well, the first thing you need to be doing is finding out when you're eligible for your 401k at your new job that he's only been at for a couple of months, and making sure you're contributing to that and getting your employer match. Because as good as the returns are on that stock he's got, it's not doubling up his money, or it's not getting the full match, right, from employer funds. So there's that. But then there's also the investment piece to this, and we can take this out from a 19-year-old and also apply it to our age and up, retirees. There is a tendency to want to get it all and get it all quickly.
Yes, and I think sometimes people get what we call recency bias. So when the market's doing well, they're like, well, let me just put everything in there and just let it ride, or go super aggressive because the market can take it right now. But if you don't have a plan, there's a really high risk to you maybe making the wrong choice, getting in at the wrong time, and then missing out. I think back to like the whole GameStop debacle, right?
Yeah,
So the price was really high and people are like, ooh, I want to get in on this growth, and then it dipped. So you want to be cautious to make sure you're following your plan and not letting your emotions drive you, because often those will lead you astray.
Yeah, and the emotions drive the market too, right? I mean, we watch this every day, and the best minds in the world can't tell you on a day-to-day basis which way the market's going to move. But we can tell you based on historical performance, and if that continues, the market over a long period of time does well. So it is the crock pot versus microwave mentality that I think people lose sight of. And we were looking up stats before we came on the air today. And, you know, I don't know that getting aggressive and holding a stock is the same, obviously, as day trading. But we looked up a day trading stat from FINRA that said 72% of day traders end each year that they day trade with losses. So you think about how the odds are stacked against you, and obviously some people are day trading and shouldn't even really, they're not qualified to even be assessing that. Some people are, but they're losing too, right?
And there are some people who just enjoy that process.
Right.
And so what I tell my clients that want to buy individual stocks and do the whole day trading thing is that's for your Vegas money.
Yep.
That's not for your retirement savings. That is for the money that if it all fell apart, you'd still be okay. Yep. That's the thing to remember. If you want to buy individual stocks or Bitcoin or whatever that thing is that draws you in, just make sure that it fits with your overall plan instead of just letting that be the thing.
Yeah. You want the plan to succeed, and you want the investments that go along with that plan to have the highest probability of success. All right, we'll get off our soapbox now. Just wanted to go there for a couple of minutes, probably more minutes than I should have, but let's dive into our questions for the week on the Get Ready for the Future show. First up, it's Glenn from Little Rock. I'm 60 and was recently offered a consulting role that pays well but has no benefits. Should I take it and delay retirement, or walk away and enjoy life now? Glenn, thanks for the question. The job's great, but it comes with no safety net, obviously. Things would change. How do you weigh extra income versus peace of mind in your 60s? And I think the first thing you have to answer, Glenn, is, are you financially independent? Don't know if you know that answer, but you're not letting us know it. If you no longer work, do you have enough income to pay your expenses and sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life? Because if you know the answer to that question, you are better prepared to answer the next question.
Yes, because Glenn really mentions two options. There is a third. It may be that when you ask yourself, am I financially independent? Do I have enough resources to replace my income, that you go, wait a second, I'm not ready. It may be that taking the consulting job is not the right answer, or retiring is not the right answer. It may be that you need to put in a little more work to get ready. Because at 60, there's some things that you're going to have some hurdles to overcome that you wouldn't have later on in life. At 60, you're not eligible for Social Security yet. So if you don't have some guaranteed income resources to utilize, it may not be time to pull that trigger yet. Another one you're not old enough for is Medicare. And with that, your healthcare expenses can get crazy. If you've ever paid for it out of pocket, you know they're expensive, and as you age, it gets more and more expensive. So those two things are very age dependent and something to consider if you're considering retiring at 60.
So circling back to that guaranteed income you mentioned, he doesn't have any from Social Security, so he may not have any for a couple of years. And why is that so important? Well, we believe in the planning process for retirement that your required income needs should be met with guaranteed income sources. And what is your required income? It's just your basic lifestyle, your basic means of existence in retirement. It's paying the bills. It's staying afloat. That doesn't need to be dependent on your investments. It needs to be guaranteed so that it is predictable, and no matter what happens in the market, as we were just kind of talking about earlier, you're going to get those monthly expenses paid. So right now we see that gap, unless he has a pension he's not telling us about or some other guaranteed income source that we don't know about. There would be an issue of creating that and then supplemented against what he has in Social Security. And then the next piece to that would be the desired income.
Well, and I do want to circle back to this idea of the required income. I think sometimes people think, well, it's just a couple of years and I can just use my assets. But one of the bigger risks to your retirement is if the market dips early in retirement. That is why it is so critical to make sure your income is protected so that the rest of your assets can do what they need to do to provide you the inflation adjustments and to make sure you have longevity long term. So that is so critical to us because of that. Now, your desired income, what's the point of retiring if you don't get to do fun things, if you don't get to do the things that fill your spirit up? So if you don't plan ahead to have that, and I mean, what's the point? You might as well just stay and work. That's why we have in our Ready to Retire process, a part of that is figuring out what you need in addition to your required, what you'd like to have to do the fun things. Whether it's, I tell people all the time, do you want to travel to Paris, Arkansas? Do you want to travel to Paris, France? Because those are two different retirements. But if you haven't thought that out, then you may not be prepared. Even though you might have a lot of assets, you may not have what you need to produce the income you'd like to have.
So create that plan, Glenn, and then you're going to know how far away you are from being financially independent, or you might be able to check the box and say, I am financially independent, and now I do what I work-wise, what I want to do rather than what I have to do, and then it might make sense to take that consulting role. Now, a few other considerations before we leave the question here. I think a lot about taxes here. Assuming you are in a W-2 role right now, and assuming the consulting role will be a 1099 position, you'll be responsible for self-employment taxes you wouldn't be subject to as a W-2 worker, and you have to have a plan to keep money back because the taxes aren't going to be withheld from your paycheck.
Yes, and those can be substantial for people. I used to have some 1099 work that I did before I was here, and I was shocked how impactful that was for me. And there are some opportunities with that as well, though. Maybe you do need to put a little more back for savings. You have some self-employed employer plan options you can use if it does make sense to go that consulting route. So it's not a one or the other. It's just something to prepare for as you're walking into that.
And, following up on that benefits discussion too, what other benefits might you be giving up, like life insurance through your employer, disability through your employer, which would not necessarily be a reason you can't do it, but it is making you more vulnerable. So you make sure you have a plan in the absence of those benefits. So if you can replace the benefits that need replacing, and you have the assets to offset any additional income needs now, or could even make enough consulting to push using your assets to a later date, I think making the switch could certainly provide him less stress, better quality of life, and more time to do the things he wants.
I think the key is it's not just about the money. When you're making a decision like this, the money is very, very important, but think about the role too. If it's something that is going to be more stressful, then definitely consider that as well. But the price that you're getting paid is not the only thing to consider. You need to look at the benefits, look at where you stand overall in your financial journey before you can make a sound decision on this.
So, Glenn, the bottom line, we don't know how much retirement savings you have. We don't know what your retirement income needs and wants are, and we would need to get those variables into a plan that could help you make the best decision. And that goes for anybody listening. That's the GenWealth Ready to Retire process, what I basically just described in its most simplistic form. If you'd like to walk through it and get a first meeting scheduled with a GenWealth financial advisor to determine if you're on track or you have already arrived at true financial independence, just give us a call at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526 to schedule your first complimentary appointment with a GenWealth financial advisor. And a reminder to subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content you can't find anywhere else to help you discover, protect, and share true financial independence. Just search for GenWealth Financial Advisors on YouTube. Next up, it's Mary via email. We have around $900,000 saved, but most of it is in my accounts, not my spouse's. Should we try to even that out, or does it not matter come retirement? Well, Mary, it does matter, but probably not as much as many people think. This is a pretty common question, Teresa, that we get in the meeting room.
Yes, I think a lot of times people don't realize that it's really just the big picture in your family that matters, overall what your assets are going to do for your family. But it is common that one spouse might have a lot more in their accounts that are named to them, which are usually going to be IRA or qualified accounts.
Yeah.
And they worry that that might set the other spouse up for some sort of challenge. As long as you guys are combining your finances for planning purposes, it doesn't really matter who owns it, but there are some strategies to consider as the advisor in creating the plan.
Yeah, so that's the assumption we have to make, Mary, when you said most of it is in your accounts. We're going to assume IRAs or 401ks, qualified retirement plans. And if you have the most retirement savings, then really the only thing that could make a difference here is your age. When you reach RMD age, which stands for Required Minimum Distribution, you'll be required to take out a percentage of your account balance each year. So if you have the larger amount and there's more in there and you don't have a plan to make withdrawals before you reach RMD age, then you're not going to be able to control your tax situation as efficiently as you might be able to otherwise. Now, for RMD age, that's obviously changing and does relieve a little bit of stress in that arena, because it used to be 70 and a half and they've been on a glide path up since then. So now most people are going to be 75 if you aren't already there. If you were born between 1951 and 1959, your RMD age is 73. If you were born 1960 or later, it will be 75. So for most of us who haven't reached RMD age or haven't reached retirement yet, that is going to be 75. So that helps, because if most people are going to be able to dip into it then. But I think when I think about lopsided retirement accounts, his and hers, and one is larger, that's one of the things that you need a strategy for that you're referring to.
Yes, especially to protect against this concept of we might need to take way more income later into retirement than we need to because of those required distributions.
Yeah.
There are ways to structure the plan so that you're doing that over time to mitigate some of that. Another thing too, Mary didn't mention her age, and we often assume people are pretty close to retirement, but if you're younger, one strategy I've used is if we're going to focus in hard on building assets, I usually focus on the older of the two if there is an imbalance, because if an early retirement is important, the older person reaches that 59 and a half faster.
Yep.
So if you need something where you're planning to retire early, then using the older person's IRAs as the primary tool and the others as a secondary might be something to look at, maybe maxing out their 401k, their IRA, and then supplementing through the other spouse. But generally speaking, that's not a big problem if you stay married.
Yep.
Now, I just recently did a cameo about the prevalence of those gray divorces, becoming divorced later in life. So if that is a concern, it can still be resolved later. But just generally speaking, the marriage assets should be seen as joint assets for the purpose of planning.
Yeah, the accounts will be individual and separate in the government's eyes.
Correct.
But we certainly see them as joint assets from a planning perspective. And if there is a divorce, there's likely going to be a split in those assets anyway, almost 50-50, right? And then the other piece of that is if there is a death, then the spouse, if they are the primary beneficiary, and I guess that's another point to bring up, is to make sure you've got your beneficiaries the way you need them to be. But if you, let's say Mary is the one that passes away first and has the larger account value, that will be inherited and become her spouse's IRA, and then will basically be the RMD age and everything else will be associated with him rather than her. So again, it's easily transitioned into the other spouse. But it does bring up a great point about, we already talked about the RMD. We've talked about many times on this show too before about the new inherited IRA rule, and it's not that new anymore, we're about 5 years into it. But when the money is passed on to the next generation, it all has to be taken out over a 10-year time frame. Which can create a tax bomb for the next generation. So I think there's all kinds of reasons that maybe didn't exist 5+ years ago for people to begin an efficient withdrawal strategy from their IRAs or 401ks long before they are required to. Because again, it goes back to, and it's really so much of what we talk about here at GenWealth. There are so many things when it comes to the markets, investments, money, politics that are out of our control that affect our money. Yes. But man, you have got to grasp everything that is in your control, and that gives you the best chance to succeed.
Yes, and I think it's easy to think in the now and not look ahead to the future. So there are a lot of variables that can affect not just you, but the next generation. And if your advisor's not talking to you about maximizing not just today, but your full retirement, that may be a subject you need to connect on.
So a couple more points there before we leave Mary's question. It is your account that is larger, technically, as we said, in the government's eyes, and you are the decision maker, and you do have full control over your retirement accounts, and technically, your spouse could not even make a decision or a withdrawal from the account without your approval. So there is that piece to it that makes it a little bit different as far as evening out. The only real reason I would look at that, beyond everything that we've talked about so far, is if you're not receiving the full employer match in a company plan. If for some reason you're putting all the money in and you're going well above and beyond the employer match and your spouse hasn't put much money in and has left money on the table, I would at least even it out to that point.
Yes, absolutely. Don't walk away from free money.
We're not big proponents of that.
No.
All right, Mary, thanks for your question. We're going to name you the question of the week and send you a free Get Ready for the Future Show tumbler for being the question of the week. We just need you to email us at show@getreadyforthefuture.com and claim it. All right, time to move to our next question. It's Larry from Springdale. I'm 52 and work in tech, which is volatile. I've saved around $350,000. What's the best move if I get laid off before I'm ready to retire? Larry, thanks for the question. Tech stocks are volatile, so I guess the tech employment industry is volatile too. Yeah, we understand that. Pink slip in your 50s can hit hard. Here's how to protect your plan if your job disappears before you're done saving. And I think a lot of people listening and watching are probably fearful of their job day to day. And maybe that never goes away. Maybe that's not even terribly warranted. But I understand the fear of what if I don't have any income tomorrow. So the first thing that I would say is, do you have emergency savings? Do you have a significant amount of emergency savings. If you're fearful of losing your job, and really anybody, even if you're not fearful of losing your job, you should have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved in cash in the bank. And I would even say for Larry, if he is really fearful, maybe even build that closer to 12, because basically we're looking for, if the worst happens for you, Larry, you can pay the bills while you're looking for work.
Yes, I think the job market feels overwhelming when you're later in your career. Like the idea of going and looking for a job right now feels more intense than it would have 10 years ago for me. But if you work in a volatile or an unstable kind of commissionable type position, it's important to have extended emergency savings anyway. That is just a good habit to build, because you may, in his case, it may be that the workplace is volatile, but let's be real. All of us could leave today and be in a car wreck. All of us could leave today and get a diagnosis we weren't expecting. So making sure you have emergency savings to protect your family's financial journey is just a good habit to build. And it'll set you up for winning later on in life and into retirement.
The next box to check, Larry, is debt. Take a good hard look at your debt. Do you have any? And if you do, get it paid off while you have income, because you've got that income. And start with those credit cards, the high interest debt, the auto loans, et cetera. And then after that, I think the next piece that I look at here for Larry is he has $350,000 saved and he's 52 years old. I'd have to say you're a little behind on retirement savings, depending on when you want to retire and how much income you'll need. And we don't know if Larry has a spouse. He doesn't indicate that. But if you're single, you may not be as behind. But if you're married and this is your only savings, we need to balance planning for job loss, like the emergency savings and paying off debt, with planning for retirement. It is time to build a plan to find out how he can arrive at financial independence.
And the beauty of being in your 50s is that you actually have the ability to put even more back inside of those plans. The IRA limit is higher. The employer plan limit is higher for what you can put in there. So as you're eliminating debt, let's start increasing those savings to make sure that you have plenty there. And the way you do that is you cut back on discretionary spending. All of us know we can tighten the belt. We all have some wiggle room if we really pay attention to it. So start tracking it so that you can really control it going forward.
And I don't want to paint Larry with a broad brush there and say, hey, you're behind on retirement. We've just done enough planning to know, generally what it's going to take. And he is an Arkansan because he's coming with that question from Springdale, and cost of living is lower here, so you can potentially have a better retirement than in other states. But I think that the piece to this that really needs to be brought out is we're not saying that he absolutely is not going to make it, right? We've talked about the things that he can do to improve his chances of financial independence. But the big thing here, I want to kind of conclude this question with this piece on the planning process. There are a lot of people in Larry's position that are in their 50s and they're wondering, what does that nest egg really mean? And I say 50s, I mean, we get people who are on the cusp of retirement that come into our meeting rooms and they want to know what that number means. We are fixated on that one number, our portfolio, our overall wealth, and we many times don't even know what that means for us in retirement. So how can the planning process, Teresa, for Larry, who may still be a decade plus out from retirement, tell him not only what does it mean now, but what will it mean later?
I think the key to retirement and financial independence is, as you mentioned, it's not a number. It's about income. Right now, Larry, you are working to make a certain amount of pay so that you can pay the expenses that you need to pay every month. That dynamic doesn't change. We just get rid of the working part of that. So taking some time to sit with a financial advisor and figure out what you truly need will really, I think, give you some clarity and hopefully some peace of mind about where you are. One thing you can do if you feel like you're running a little behind, get allergic to debt. Because the less income need you have walking into retirement, the less assets you need to meet it. So making sure you have that clarified, whether you're 10 years out from retirement or 10 days out from retirement, you need a plan.
Let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to go under the hood of the GenWealth Ready to Retire process to kind of talk about what that plan looks like and how it's built, because we mentioned in a previous answer to a question that we needed those variables, right? We need those numbers. So if you're listening and you're like Larry, you're in your 50s and you got a nest egg, you don't know if it's enough and how to get there and what you're going to do in retirement, what we would do, we would sit down with you and we'd take a look at your current snapshot. We'd take those numbers. We'd talk to you about, when do you want to retire? When is your retirement age? And we'll set that in motion. So now we know how many years of pre-retirement we have. We can analyze your contribution rate. We can assume a realistic rate of return, not
Keyword realistic.
not what we were talking about earlier, right? Yeah, realistic long-term rate of return on your assets, and that gives us a finish line for that number, right? If you're going to retire at 65, we're going to be able to estimate what your wealth will be like. But that's only the first piece of the equation.
And then what we have to do from there is we have to create a structure for what to do in the interim. So once we know where you're headed, we've created the destination, we build the roadmap to get you there. And so once we know what your income needs to be, we know what your current assets are and what your current savings rates are, we can tell you any tweaks that may need to be made, or it may be that we do that and you're in great shape and we get to celebrate with you that you're already on track. But if you don't have the roadmap built, it's just like heading out west and hoping you land in San Diego. You might, or you might end up in Seattle. You don't know because you don't have a real roadmap to get there.
Yeah, so when you have that number, your finish line number, then it becomes turning that into a reliable source of income. When you incorporate your guaranteed income sources like Social Security, and if there are pensions, with the income that you could safely withdraw from your assets and not run out over the course of your life, then you know what your plan is. And I just can't say enough how much peace of mind that brings to a client, to rather than wandering through the wilderness, to use your roadmap analogy, to know now their destination is clear and they can work the plan. And that also, quite frankly, helps you avoid distractions like what we talked about earlier, and that's chasing the big score from an investment perspective.
And I think when that is just a nebulous number, what I fear is that you're going to work so hard to get to that number and it's not going to be the right number. Or that you're going to forego enjoying life now to get to this nebulous number and it was way more than you needed. I would much rather you get to enjoy life now and in retirement if at all possible.
All right, time for our final question. This is from Lois in North Little Rock. My spouse wants to move closer to the grandkids, but the cost of living is higher there. We're 65 and planning to retire this year. How do we know if we can afford it? So the heart says move near the grandkids. The budget says hold up. So let's find out. Yeah, it is tough to find out if you can afford both. You have to know if you can afford your retirement lifestyle wherever you go, and that goes back to the planning process. The first thing you should do is create the retirement income plan that we just spent a few minutes discussing in detail, that incorporates those guaranteed income sources like Social Security and layers on top monthly withdrawals from your portfolio to create your total income. So it'll assume that you live to a certain age, but you should have a longevity bucket in there too in case you live longer than expected. And once you know your income, you can begin to compare the cost of living in North Little Rock with the cost of living where your grandkids are, which she didn't tell us. We'd be able to provide a little more clarity on that if we knew it was Florida versus Kansas, right? We don't know where you're going, but you know, you've already said that it costs more. So you must have done some research. I would suggest do more research. Understand if you could sell your home and buy a home without adding a mortgage or increasing your current mortgage payment if you still have a mortgage. There are other costs like gas prices and groceries and utilities. And she may have done the legwork on that, but she's asking us, how do you know if you can afford it? There's a lot underneath there too, going state to state, that makes things different.
Well, and I would think too, we talked about nebulous versus finite. You know, nebulously, you know it costs more, but do you know, like you mentioned before, if you know how much income your current assets can produce and you know what the cost of living is where you're going, you do some research on potential places to live, things like that, then it's a lot easier for you to figure out if those two are in alignment. Another thing to look into is taxes. In some states, Social Security is state taxable. In some states, it's not. So understanding the tax difference, you know, what is their income tax level at? Because those things can impact you very dramatically. And by the way, while you're picking your Medicare supplements, or whether you're going to do a, you know, Medicare gap, you know, all those sorts of things, that's something to consider too, because some of those policies are state specific, some of those policies travel well. So you're going to want to make sure you look at more than just that one piece, which is that cost of living, but rather really define what your lifestyle needs to be and then whether it's compatible where you're headed.
So you're saying there's some hidden costs, right?
There are.
They're not right there front and center, you know, and it's so in depth. We did it. There was a question similar to this on the show not that long ago, and they did give us the specifics of what state they were looking at moving to. One of the things that people is a real alluring when you talk about taxes is they want to go somewhere where there's no state income tax. The real wealthy go there, right? They go to the states that don't charge state income tax. I've got some clients in Texas and Florida. Those are, does Florida have? I'm not sure Florida does. Texas, I know, does not have state income tax. But the trouble with that is you need to look at your total tax cost. And in Texas, the property taxes are kind of high, right? And that matters, right? If you're going to own a home, how much more are you going to pay for property taxes, for insurance, things like that? And the study that we had looked at had talked about Texas property taxes were higher than average, but California's were even higher, not because the property taxes themselves were higher, but because the homes were worth more. So when homes are worth more, then even though the percentage you're paying in property taxes may not be as high as another state, you're actually going to pay more in actual dollars. So,
well, and there is this thing that you can do here in Arkansas where if you're 65, you can kind of lock in your property taxes. Do they have that at the state you're going to, or is that something that's going to continue to increase? So there's some details and nuance. But again, if you don't know what income you can produce with your assets, then you're already behind the ball there. You've got to figure that out first so that you know what you have the ability to produce at the new place and see if that's sufficient.
You mentioned Medicare, healthcare in general. How accessible is good care where you're going? And then there's the social component to that, friends, church, your social network. How difficult will it be to leave that? I know you want to spend more time with your grandkids, but I think it's safe to say you're not going to spend all your time with them, especially as they grow up and they start to live their own lives. What's it going to look like then? You're going to need that social network. And then I would wrap up by saying here, they've told us that they're going to retire, so we know you're going to have more time on your hands. I think it would be a great idea to take a trip to the new location and stay for an extended period of time. When we take a vacation somewhere, we don't really get plugged in to the community if we're there for 1 week. Maybe if you go to the same place year after year after year, that might happen, but maybe they could spend a month. They're not going to be working, and if they've got their plan in place, they could spend maybe a month or maybe even 2, enjoy the grandkids, but also spend some time getting immersed in the community to get a feel for if you could see yourself living there.
Yes, I just met a sweet lady at church this past weekend who had done just that. She was considering moving back to Arkansas to live closer to some of her kids. And so she came, and what she did was she lived with one kid for a little bit and then the other kid for a little bit to, spread that out, but also to give her a chance to figure out what community was a good fit for her. Yeah. And so she had some time to build friendships before she moved. Because, guys, in retirement, you have a lot of free time. And I know a lot of people say, well, I'll just play golf. There's only so many rounds of golf you're going to play in a given week. So having a good connected group to hang out with, to live life with, in our experience, leads to a more fulfilled retirement. You've got to have something to retire to, not from. I know that feels counterintuitive, but we are built for purpose. So if you can build that in advance, it'll really be way better for you in the long run.
I had a client too that they live in Oklahoma, and they had a brainstorming idea they were going to move to Costa Rica. So now we're talking about international relocation.
And that has its own things as an advisor.
There's a lot of advertisements out there. Costa Rica with a lower cost of living. They did take a trip down there, and they didn't stay for a month, but they stayed for an extended period of time, and they're still in Oklahoma. So
didn't work out.
That tells you all you need to know about that, and not that it wouldn't work for somebody else, but for those clients, they decided to stay put. Okay, the bell was in the background. Time for our final thoughts.
I think the overarching theme that I was hearing today was people need to plan. And I know we're kind of passionate about planning, so I'm biased that way. But with any stage of your life, whatever you're trying to decide when it comes to your finances, taking some time to look from a 30,000-foot view and then getting more granular, I feel like gives you a lot of freedom when you make a decision to feel more confident in that decision. So I'd encourage you to get with your advisor and really plan out whatever you're facing at whatever stage of life you're in.
Yeah, I think it stands out to me almost every show that we have questions that when we read them, we have more questions. As an advisor, you want to cover all of the bases, and retirement is complicated, as is pointed out by the questions that we get each and every week. Why would you want to go into it and go through it alone? Hiring a financial advisor who's going to build a retirement income plan like we do here at GenWealth will give you clarity on the questions. And I had a client tell me the other day, they listen to the show and they love hearing questions because they are good questions. They go, oh, I hadn't really thought of that. They have somebody they can call and ask that question to instead of trying to get an answer on the radio show or just wondering and never really getting it, or worse yet, Googling it. So if you're ready to do that, if you're ready to walk through the GenWealth Ready to Retire process, call us toll free, 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And that's all the time we have for this week's Get Ready for the Future show. Thanks for watching or listening, however you get us, podcast, radio, online. Thanks for doing that. And text us a question or leave us a voicemail. The number is 501-381-5228. You could hear your question next week. We'll see you then.
The GenWealth financial team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.